Happy Sunday, everyone. Welcome to Our Issues Birmingham. Great guest today, one of my friends, acquaintances, mentors, longtime lawyer, longer than me for that matter, Justice Ralph Cook, former Supreme Court Justice for the state of Alabama. How are you, sir?
Doing well and delighted to be here with you.
Thanks for agreeing to come on up.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. I've seen your show many, many times, and you do just such a great job.
Well, thank you. Well, then you know what it's about.
I do.
So I'm about to shut up. So tell us a little bit about how you got to this stage of your life. And I know people don't know what stage of your life you're in, but there was a time when he was on the Supreme Court of Alabama, which at the time was not the first, but the second person, African-American person that had ascended to that part of our judicial system. So tell us how you got there and where you are now.
Without getting into the weeds, Tommy, I grew up here in Jefferson County. I'm a native of Bessemer. My father was a longtime businessman out there. He spent 67 years in the dry cleaning business. And my mother was a principal and a teacher. And so I grew up in a family that prized education. As a matter of fact, as far back as I can remember, there was no question about whether or not I was going to go on to college. It was a question of where I was going to go and what I was going to do. And so that was the framework I grew up in. I grew up working with my father in his business. And I think that kept me on the straight and narrow insofar as getting through high school, and I went off to college in Nashville, Tennessee, and I spent 3 years in getting my undergraduate degree. I knew what I wanted to do before I went to college, so I went to college so I could get my undergraduate degree to go to law school. And then
He said 3 years, by the way. That's not the norm these days.
And then after college, I went to Howard Law School and got a law degree, and came back here and passed the bar. And like I say, without getting too far into the weeds, I spent a number of years out of state. I spent a year here at Miles College teaching in their freshman orientation program, or freshman program. And then I went to California for 5 years. And I came back here in 1974. Was an assistant district attorney in Bessemer. Then I became a district judge in Bessemer, circuit judge in Bessemer. Then became dean and professor at Miles Law School. And then in 1993, Justice Adams retired, and Governor Jim Folsom appointed me to the Supreme Court of Alabama.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. And of course, Jim and I are friends. And he didn't stay long enough, but I like to refer to those days as the good old days.
They were, and you know, Governor Folsom deserves the credit for starting the auto industry in Alabama, which has produced so many jobs and so many different factories. If you recall, it was during the short time that he was governor that Mercedes-Benz was brought to Alabama.
Yeah, and many followed after that and created a number of jobs.
Right.
So at the time when you were on the Supreme Court, you were appointed originally, and it's my recollection you ran when that term expired?
That's right. I was appointed in 1993, and I served the unexpired term of Justice Adams. And inasmuch as his term would have expired in 1994, I was required right after my appointment to run for office, and I ran my first statewide race in 1994.
Now, the import of that is that in 1994, our political party division is much different, was much different than it is now.
That's correct. That's correct. I think you were beginning to see there were signs of it becoming more a competitive political party situation in Montgomery, in Alabama rather, because in 1994 I did have opposition in the general election.
Yes, and that person later went on to get a seat.
No, not the person that I ran against in 1994.
That was Montiel?
Yes, yes.
Mark,
Uh-huh.
How did I remember that? I don't know.
That's good. Great memory.
I don't know. I just remember that from somewhere. So you served out, those are 4-year appointments or 6-year?
6 year, 6 year. And so I served until 2000, which was the end of my term, and I ran the second time, and I was unsuccessful in that race. And after that, I was undecided on what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, and I ended up with a place that was very welcoming to me, and a place I've enjoyed for the last 20 years, Heroin, Newell and Newton.
Right. And that's a very old law firm in the state of Alabama and in the city of Birmingham. I think 100 years maybe?
In excess of 100 years.
Right there next to Bright Star Restaurant. I think they opened at the same time, I guess. They're both old.
Well, Heroin derives from a firm that started in the 1800s, and I think Bright Star was the early 1900s.
1907?
Yeah.
Wow. And of course it's changed,
That's correct.
as has the practice of law.
Yes. Yes.
And that law firm are personal injury lawyers, at least when I was a law clerk and a baby lawyer. And then those were times when we didn't have television commercials. And then something changed.
Well, you know, the law practice evolves, and I used to say that there are times when certain things are hot, quite so to speak, and so law practice evolves and changes over the years, and so the Heroin practice has evolved and changed. I know when I went there, Alec Newton was the senior partner still there, and Alec talked about all of the different kinds of cases that he handled as a lawyer. And of course, we did something just a bit different from what he did. So that's just the way it is.
Well, hold that thought. We're going to come back from break and talk about some more things you've experienced. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. This is Our Issues Birmingham. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. We're talking with Justice Ralph Cook about a variety of things involving our judiciary and the practice of law. Obviously, things have changed. We talked about the advertising piece that changed dramatically. As a matter of fact, you probably just got through seeing 3 commercials while we were at break from my good friend and colleague. But things are changing as recent as a few months ago with our judiciary throughout the state. And when I say changing, Jefferson County is a very large county when it comes to litigation and lawsuits and things of that nature. What has occurred and what is occurring statewide that's changing that?
Well, I think you're making reference to the fact that we recently had a judgeship transferred from Jefferson County to Madison County. And that came about, if I could give a little background to this, in 2017, the legislature created the Judicial Reallocation Commission. But before I do that, let me say this. The legislature in Alabama has what is called plenary power. That means that it has pretty much the power to do anything that it desires to do. It's only restrained by the Constitution of Alabama. And
excuse me, sorry. It's under consideration this next election. We laugh because it's so big.
The Constitution of Alabama. And back when Chief Justice, then later Senator Harold Heflin was Chief Justice, the state adopted Amendment 328 of the Alabama Constitution. You know, when you talk about the Alabama Constitution, it's been amended almost 1,000 times.
Yeah, it's over 800 amendments, I think.
Last one I looked at was 950.
Wow.
So it's much more than 900. So anyway, the Constitution of Alabama in Amendment 328, Section 6.12, provides that should judges be, the Supreme Court of Alabama should have the authority to recommend to the Alabama legislature whether or not judgeships should be increased or decreased. And then the legislature has the power to decide whether or not it will increase or decrease judges. Well, in 2017, the Alabama legislature passed what is known as the Judicial Reallocation Commission. And on that commission are judges, lawyers, the Attorney General is on it, just a number of people, but it's 12 people. And it gave them the authority to decide whether or not there was judgeships should be increased or decreased around the state. Well, there's only one problem with that, and that's the pesky little thing called the Alabama Constitution, which says that there are two ways that judges can be increased or decreased in the state of Alabama. One is that the Supreme Court has to look at it and make a recommendation to the legislature whether or not a judgeship should be added or one should be taken away from a particular county or judicial district. And what we had in the last 2 months is that the Judicial Reallocation Commission, using data that came from 2017, 18, 19, 5 years old at the oldest, 3 years old at the youngest, and decided that Jefferson County had too many judges and transferred one of those judges to Madison County. Now, the Jefferson County judges say that the data doesn't support it because they count cases differently in Jefferson County than they do in Madison County. And secondly, that COVID has changed things in terms of how cases are handled. And although Huntsville is now larger than Birmingham, remember, Jefferson County still remains the largest county in the state. And the judges in Jefferson County hear cases from all over Jefferson County. So that's where we are with that. And a lawsuit has been filed.
Are y'all involved in that?
No, we're not. And a circuit judge in Montgomery ruled that the state was correct in this position. And as I understand it, that the plaintiff is going to appeal it, and we'll see what the appellate courts have to say about it.
So to put that in a reality, we had in Jefferson County a judge that won an election, and before she could take her office, her seat was moved to Madison County.
Thank you for adding that. That is exactly correct.
Imagine that. You go to all that trouble, run for a job, get the job, spend the money to get the job, and then the job disappears after the people have put you in that job.
Yes, that's what happened. I could think if you look at it like this, the state of Alabama determined that judgeship was in Jefferson County. The state of Alabama held that judgeship out as being available. And then the person qualifies, run for that judgeship, campaigns around the county, spends whatever money is necessary to do it and the time necessary to do it. And then wins the primary, then after the primary, the seat is taken from Jefferson County and sent to Madison County.
It sounds like the old classic bait and switch to me. I'm going to call it AOC. That stands for Administrative Office of Courts. That's a whole nother layer of bureaucracy in our state. Do they have a weigh in on this issue?
Well, typically, the recommendation from the Supreme Court would either come directly from the Supreme Court or through the Administrative Office of Courts, but that recommendation did not occur in this case. In these facts, the Supreme Court has never spoken to whether or not that judgeship should have been removed from Jefferson County.
So that remains pending, and we will see where that ends up.
Yes.
Hold that thought. This is Our Issues Birmingham. We're going to take a short break and come back and talk some more with Justice Cook. Don't go away. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. We've been talking about a variety of things, mostly focused on our judicial system. Of course, we both work in that judicial system, and I can attest to the fact that COVID has changed things dramatically in some respects, some for the positive, some for the not so positive. I think the biggest complaint from the viewing audience would have to be the delay that it takes in trying to get issues resolved that you may have, whether it be civil, criminal, particularly domestic, because that's such a volatile universe to begin with. But any thoughts on how that's going to work going forward, and things that might be implemented to catch up, so to speak?
Well, I think that it will probably get better over time, but there is no question that as a result of COVID, for a period of time, very few cases were being heard, and then the courts tried to adjust by going to video to do some of the most urgent things, but trials were put on hold for a long period of time, and I suspect as a consequence of that you have severe backlogs, and that the courts will have to try to work through those. Now, there are some areas that it impacts differently from others. For example, in criminal cases, because there's a speedy trial provision in our state and federal constitutions.
But not in the state of Alabama.
Well, oh, you mean in the state of Alabama Constitution?
There's no Speedy Trial Act in Alabama.
You're correct. You're correct. That's right. It's on the federal constitution. And so
it's another part of that 950 amendment Constitution. Have you seen the new Constitution?
I have started looking at the recompiled Constitution.
Are we down to 20 or 30?
Well,
We shifted gears. Let's finish talking about what the future is. Then we'll talk about the Constitution.
Okay. Yeah, you're right, because that's a whole nother subject. But insofar as how COVID will affect the courts, I'm sure the courts are focused on trying to work through those backlogs that built. And you mentioned the area of domestic relations. That's an area that requires, I think, some getting to those cases as quickly as you can. Yes, said those as priority cases. But even civil cases, people who have been injured are seeking their day in court too. So there's pressures from all over the system to try to get things done so that people can get in and have their issues resolved.
And in criminal cases, people that are in jail, either without bond or bonds they can't make, keeping in mind that regardless of what you think, there is a presumption of innocence that is a part of that Constitution.
That's correct.
You know, that we just can't give lip service to. I mean, we've got to address the fact that that's a person's freedom in that instance. But our Constitution we've touched on. You say you've glanced at a version of it. The idea is to streamline it, get rid of some very archaic provisions that have no application in a civilized society anymore.
Yeah.
So what do you see?
Well, you know, those have been described as eliminating, that's probably what you're saying about it, eliminating racist language, and taking the Constitution and taking all of those amendments and trying to recompile those as part of articles in the Constitution so that it reduces the length of it.
Well, I think Bill Baxley started trying to do that back in his day.
Well, I think you're right about that. And from time to time, the legislature has tried to recompile various articles in the Constitution.
So what people may not understand is that Alabama lacks what is referred to as home rule. So we in Jefferson County, by virtue of our Constitution, are asked to vote on matters that might affect Lowndes County, for example.
That's correct. That's correct.
And we don't know what's going on in Lowndes County and how an amendment, so they do that by virtue of another amendment to the Constitution.
That's right. Well, and that all goes back to 1901 when the Constitution was adopted. The people in control of power and politics in the state wanted to decentralize the power so that people from these power areas, which might not have been the most populous areas, could control things in the state. And so you have the right under the Alabama Constitution, when an issue comes up that affects Jefferson County, you could very well have people from very small counties on the outstreams of extremes of the state of Alabama voting on those issues that affect people in Jefferson County.
And they must have no clue of how that might affect us. I mean, we don't know. I'm sure you can't generalize, and certain people read and keep up and study, but the amendment section of the ballot is usually the last thing you see.
That's right. That's right. Just like we
Eeny,
might not
meeny,
know.
miny, mo, kind
That's
of.
right. We might not know about what might affect people in Hale County, for example, or Tuscaloosa County. That's your point, and very, very well made.
Well, we're not going to fix it. I'm guaranteed that that the two of us, we can play our role and do what we do, but it's doubtful that just us can fix the problems that have arisen from the absolutely, totally chaotic and disorganized Constitution of the state of Alabama. But we're going to call it a day with people knowing that it's messed up. Let's just say it that way. We need to fix it. So if you get a chance to vote for a fix, do so. This is Our Issues Birmingham. It's been great having you today.
Good being here with you.
And perhaps we'll do it again, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Put the keys down, Kevin.
But I'm gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
I've taken 25 selfies in the last 10 minutes.
26.
Yep, I'm definitely gonna call a ride home.